The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe episode 53 Rage Machines, Political Outrage, Mob Mentality, Inherited Anger. Welcome back to the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe. Today, we step into the volatile world of rage, not just as an emotion, but as a force that powers politics, media, and collective behavior. Anger has always been part of the human story, but today it has been industrialized. Outrage is engineered into headlines, amplified by algorithms, and weaponized by groups who thrive on division. Rage connects us through solidarity, shared grievance, and righteous fury, but it also consumes us, tipping easily into mob mentality, scapegoating, and violence. Beneath it lies inherited anger, generational wounds, cultural traumas, and historical grievances that ripple through families and nations alike. In this episode, we'll explore how rage becomes machinery, how it is triggered, channeled, exploited, and sustained. We'll look at its roots in psychology and history, reflect on its impact in our own lives, and ask what it means to hold anger as both boundary and burden. Because when rage is left unchecked, it builds engines that drive us, but rarely toward freedom. Let's begin. The anatomy of outrage, from emotion to engine. Anger is one of our most primal emotions. It rises in the body like fire, tightening the chest, sharpening the voice, surging through the bloodstream with heat and urgency. At its core, anger is protective. It sets boundaries, it says enough. But in modern culture, anger rarely stays personal. It becomes collective, magnified, and weaponized. What begins as a spark of frustration can quickly become a roaring blaze when fed by systems built to amplify it. When anger becomes more than personal, outrage is no longer just a private experience, it has become an engine, one that fuels politics, media, and digital platforms. The question isn't just why do we get angry, but how is our anger being used? Attributes of engineered outrage: speed. Reactions are immediate, often bypassing reflection. Amplification. Platforms magnify anger because it drives engagement. Contagion. Emotions spread faster in groups than in individuals. Exploitation. Outrage becomes a resource for profit, power, or attention. Exhaustion. After the high, burnout, fatigue, and disillusionment follow. Themes: from fire to machine. Primal anger. Evolution wired anger as survival. To defend territory, protect kin, or resist injustice. Social fuel. In groups, anger binds people together. Shared outrage builds solidarity, but also conformity. The media economy. Studies show negative and emotional content spreads faster online than neutral or positive content. Outrage is profitable. It keeps us scrolling, sharing, and fighting. The feedback loop: we express anger, algorithms amplify it, headlines feed it back, and the cycle repeats. The result isn't just expression but entrapment. Anger as perpetual motion machine. Personal reflection: I've felt this myself. Times when anger felt real and justified, but when I turned to social media, I noticed something shift. The anger stopped being mine, it became ours. And in that shift, it grew louder, sharper, almost intoxicating. I found myself scrolling, feeding the emotion, watching videos or headlines that made me more outraged than before. At times, I would post or comment, and there was a strange satisfaction in being heard, in voicing what others were also feeling. But looking back, I realized I wasn't just expressing my truth, I was being pulled into a current. The more I engaged, the more it grew, and the more it grew, the less I felt in control. What started as anger turned into exhaustion. It left me drained yet still hooked. It was in those moments I began to see how easily rage becomes machinery. How quickly our rawest emotions can be turned into cycles we don't even notice we're trapped inside. Psychological insight. Anger as boundary. Anger as tool. Psychology sees anger as a signal, a defense against violation, injustice, or harm. It's deeply tied to survival, but social psychology also shows how anger behaves differently in groups. Gustave Le Bon's classic work on crowd psychology noted how emotions intensify when shared, leading to behavior individuals might never choose alone. Modern neuroscience confirms this. Mirror neurons mean we literally feel the emotions of others, so outrage spreads like wildfire. Media scholars highlight another dimension. Outrage isn't just emotional, it's economic. Research shows content that provokes anger is far more likely to be shared. Anger is sticky. In this way, our survival response has been hijacked by algorithms that know exactly which buttons to press. For me, realizing this changed how I saw my own anger. What I thought was mine was often being shaped, nudged, and amplified by forces outside me. Anger was still valid, but it was also vulnerable, easily turned into fuel for systems that didn't care about my well being, only my engagement. Embodiment prompt or practice this week: when you feel anger rising, whether online, in conversation, or while reading the news, pause. Notice, where do I feel it in my body? What boundary is this anger trying to protect? Is this my anger, or am I feeding a machine? Take a breath before reacting. Even a few seconds of reflection can shift anger from compulsion to choice. Integration moment: anger is not the enemy. It protects us, reveals injustice, and fuels transformation. But when anger is turned into machinery, it consumes rather than protects. Seeing the shift from personal fire to systemic engine is the first step in reclaiming it. Seed to plant this week: when outrage rises, ask, am I fueling the machine, or am I honoring my boundary? Small pauses in awareness can be acts of resistance, moments where anger becomes guide, not gear. Mob mentality and the crowd. There's a shift that happens when anger leaves the individual and enters the group. Alone, anger is fire in the chest, a surge of energy demanding expression. But in a crowd, anger doesn't just add, it multiplies. What one person might never say or do alone becomes possible, even inevitable, when carried by collective emotion. When anger becomes contagious, mob mentality isn't just about violence in the streets. It's visible online too, in comment sections on Twitter threads, in digital pylons. The group gives permission. It lowers the threshold for expression. And once the spark catches, the fire spreads faster than reason can contain. Attributes of mob anger contagion. Emotion spreads instantly through mirroring. Permission. Individuals act in ways they wouldn't alone. De-individuation. Personal identity blurs into the group. Escalation. Outrage becomes competition. Who can shout louder, rage harder? Aftermath. When the fire burns out, guilt, shame, or disillusionment often follow. Themes. The crowd as amplifier. Classical theories. Gustave Le Bon described how crowds dissolve individual judgment. Anger becomes primal, unthinking. De-individuation studies, Zimbardo and Dina's research showed how anonymity increases aggression, masks, darkness, or online avatars make us bolder. Digital mobs. Social media replicates the conditions of crowds. Anonymity, visibility, contagion. Outrage spreads, posts escalate, and algorithms feed the fire. Righteousness and violence. Mobs are rarely self-aware. They feel justified. They believe they are defending truth, morality, or justice, even as they destroy. Personal reflection: I felt the pull of the crowd. Not always in the streets, but online, where a single headline or viral video sparked waves of anger that swept me up, almost before I noticed. There were times I added my voice, commented, or shared, and in the moment it felt righteous, even empowering. The sense of we was intoxicating, a chorus louder than any single voice. But later, scrolling back, I noticed something unsettling. The rage didn't feel like mine anymore. It was diluted, generic, borrowed. What I thought was an expression was really a reaction, shaped by what others were saying, how they were saying it. And once the noise died down, I was left with exhaustion and unease. Had I really spoken from truth, or just joined the chorus? That moment taught me something about mobs. They don't just amplify anger, they flatten it. They strip it of nuance, of context, of personal meaning. And in that flattening, we can lose not only ourselves, but each other. Psychological insight: why we join the crowd. Social psychology explains why mob mentality is so compelling. Henry Tajfel's social identity theory shows how quickly we align with in-groups against out-groups. Anger strengthens belonging. We are right, they are wrong. Neuroscience deepens the picture. Mirror neurons mean we literally catch emotions. Anger expressed by one person lights up in others, spreading through groups faster than logic can intervene. Online, this process accelerates. One angry post, amplified by algorithms, can reach millions within minutes. For me, the power of this became clear when I realized how different my anger felt alone versus online. Alone, it was sharp, specific, pointing at a boundary or injustice. Online, it became diffuse, generic, less about what I truly felt and more about staying in rhythm with the group. That loss of authenticity revealed the danger. Mobs can protect, yes, but they can also erase. Embodiment prompt or practice. Next time you notice anger in a group, whether at a protest, in a comment thread, or even among friends, pause and ask, is this my anger or am I amplifying the group's? What would I feel if I stood alone in this moment without the crowd behind me? Does this expression bring clarity or just noise? Write down the difference you notice when anger is yours versus when it belongs to the group. Integration moment mob anger shows us both power and peril. In numbers, we feel stronger, bolder, and justified. But crowds can also strip us of nuance, flatten our humanity, and drive us to actions we'd never choose alone. Reclaiming anger means holding on to its personal truth, even when the crowd shouts louder. Seed to plant this week: when you feel the pull of collective outrage, pause. Ask, if I were the only one feeling this, what would I do? That answer may not stop the mob, but it might stop you from losing yourself inside it. Inherited anger and generational rage. Not all rage begins with us. Some of it is inherited, passed down like a family heirloom, except instead of gold or property, it's wounds, grudges, and unfinished battles. Whole cultures carry anger across generations, long after the original cause has faded. Wars end, but resentment lingers. Injustices soften, but the memory of harm remains alive in descendants. The anger we carry without knowing. This is inherited anger, a form of rage that feels personal, yet is rooted in history. It's the anger of ancestors living through us, shaping how we see ourselves and others. And when it surfaces, it can be as destructive as it is invisible. Attributes of inherited rage: ancestral wounds, traumas from past generations echoing in present behavior, collective memory, cultural or national stories that sustain grievance, identity formation, anger woven into belonging and selfhood, unconscious burden, rage carried without full awareness, transmission, stories, silence, and emotional imprinting pass it forward. Themes: rage beyond the individual, transgenerational trauma. Studies of Holocaust survivors' families, Danieli, 1998, show trauma can echo through 3 or more generations. Rage, grief, and fear are unconsciously inherited. National histories, colonialism, slavery, displacement. The anger of these wounds doesn't vanish with time. It mutates, often becoming part of political identity or cultural struggle. Family systems. Anger can be normalized within families, passed through parenting styles, silence, or unresolved conflict. Children inherit the emotional weather of their households. Sacred grievance. Communities may sacralize past injustices, using memory as fuel for solidarity, but also for cycles of revenge. Personal reflection. Looking back at my own life, I can trace anger that didn't always feel entirely mine. In my family, there were undercurrents, frustrations, disappointments, even outright rage that seemed to hang in the air. At the time, I didn't see it as inherited. I thought it was just the mood of the household, the background noise of daily life. But as I grew older, I started noticing how quickly I carried anger that wasn't fully about the moment. A small trigger could bring up a huge reaction. Later reflecting, I'd realized the reaction was outsized, almost as if I was carrying someone else's pain. It took years of unpacking to see that much of what I was carrying had roots before me. Patterns of silence, of suppression, of outbursts followed by shame. They weren't invented in my generation. They had been modeled, handed down, even normalized. I wasn't just fighting my own battles. I was living out echoes of older ones. That realization was both painful and liberating. Painful, because I could see how much of my life had been shaped by ghosts. Liberating, because once I recognized the inheritance, I had the choice to stop passing it forward. Psychological insight, the science of generational anger research into epigenetics, suggests that trauma can leave marks not only in memory but in biology, altering stress responses in the children and grandchildren of those who lived through extreme suffering. It means inherited anger isn't just metaphorical, it can be embedded in our bodies. Family systems theory, Bowen, highlights how unresolved conflict passes down through emotional processes, often unconsciously. Without awareness, each generation repeats cycles of anger, shame, or silence. Sociology offers another layer. Maurice Halbwach's concept of collective memory shows how groups sustain grievances across centuries. These memories create identity. We are the wronged people, but can also trap communities in cycles of rage. Personally, I recognize how this plays out not just in history books but in my own life. The anger I felt wasn't always about me or my situation. Sometimes it was an echo, a repetition, a script I didn't write but found myself performing. Understanding this softened my self judgment. It wasn't a weakness to carry inherited rage, but it was my responsibility to decide whether I kept passing it on. Embodiment prompt or practice. Take a quiet moment and reflect. What angers you most deeply? Does this anger feel fully yours, or does it carry echoes of older stories, family patterns, cultural wounds? Write down one moment where you felt your anger might not have begun with you. Notice how it feels in your body when you frame rage as inheritance rather than purely personal. Integration moment, inherited rage teaches us that anger is not always born in the moment. It can be the voice of history speaking through us. Recognizing this doesn't erase it, but it does offer a choice. We can continue the cycle, or we can pause, listen, and begin to transform what was passed down. Seed to plant this week: when you feel anger rise, pause and ask, whose voice is this? Mine, or another's carried through me? Even asking the question is an act of freedom, a way of refusing to be only a vessel for old fire. Outrage as industry and algorithm rage is no longer just a human emotion, it's a business model. Entire industries, from media to politics to tech platforms, are designed to monetize outrage. Why? Because nothing captures attention like anger. Nothing spreads faster than indignation. Nothing keeps people clicking, scrolling, and reacting like the hit of fury at a headline, a tweet, or a video clip. The economy of anger. In the digital age, outrage isn't just expressed, it's engineered, amplified, and sold. Attributes of algorithmic rage amplification. Anger spreads further and faster than joy or calm. Polarization, outrage divides groups into us versus them. Addiction, constant engagement with conflict creates compulsive loops. Exploitation, industries profit directly from our rage-driven attention. Distortion, subtle issues get exaggerated into battles for survival. Themes, rage as product media outrage cycle. News outlets discovered long ago that if it bleeds, it leads. In the digital economy, outrage is the headline itself. Every crisis is breaking, every story catastrophic, every opponent a villain. Politics of anger. Political movements harness outrage because it unites people quickly. Fear and fury build solidarity faster than nuanced debate. Leaders don't just reflect rage, they manufacture it. Social media algorithms, platforms like Facebook and Twitter X, discovered that outrage keeps people online longer. Content that provokes anger is boosted automatically, not because of truth, but because of engagement. Outrage as entertainment. From reality TV conflict to YouTube reaction videos, rage has become a spectacle. We don't just feel it, we consume it. Personal reflection. I've felt myself pulled into these cycles more times than I'd like to admit. A headline flashes across the screen, designed to provoke. I click. I read. I get angry. Maybe I even share it with someone else, passing the spark along. There were times when I could lose whole evenings caught in these loops, scrolling through comment sections, watching arguments unfold, shaking my head at the stupidity or cruelty of others. And each time I felt justified. Outrage always feels righteous in the moment. But after, I felt drained, agitated, almost polluted. I realized eventually that the cycle wasn't an accident. It was the design. Platforms don't care if I'm informed or even if I'm right, they care if I'm hooked. Rage is sticky, it glues me to the screen. And if I step back, I can see how much of my energy was given away, how much of my focus was being harvested. Looking at it now, I see the pattern. My outrage wasn't fully mine. It was engineered, amplified, nudged. The feeling was real, but the hook was manufactured. Psychological insight, the attention economy of anger psychology, helps explain why outrage sells so well. Research in effective neuroscience shows that negative emotions trigger stronger and faster physiological responses than positive ones. Anger spikes cortisol, raises heart rate, and narrows focus. It primes us for action or for endless engagement. A 2017 study from Yale University, Brady et al., found that moral emotional language online, words like disgusting, outrageous, shameful, significantly increased the spread of content. Anger goes viral. Media psychology builds on this. George Gerbner's Mean World Syndrome showed how constant exposure to threatening media makes people more fearful, reactive, and polarized. In the algorithmic era, the same principle applies, except it's not just fear, it's fury. Personally, I've noticed how much calmer I feel when I step away from outrage driven media. My anger doesn't vanish, but it feels more grounded, more mine. I can see issues more clearly without the algorithm constantly poking the bruise. That difference between rage I choose and rage that's harvested is the difference between agency and manipulation, embodiment prompt or practice. Next time you feel outrage rising from something online, pause before reacting. Ask, who benefits if I share or engage with this? Notice, what does this do to my body, tight chest, racing heart, clenched jaw? Try. Instead of reposting or reacting, take a deep breath. Step away for 5 minutes. See if the outrage feels the same without the algorithm feeding it. Integration moment outrage is powerful. It can unite people, expose injustice, fuel change. But in the algorithmic age, outrage has been industrialized. It's not just our anger anymore, it's a product bought and sold. Recognizing this doesn't mean giving up on anger. It means reclaiming it, refusing to let platforms dictate what we feel and why. Seed to plant this week when outrage flares online, pause and ask, is this my anger or the algorithm's harvest? Claiming that awareness is the first act of resistance. The shadow of mob mentality anger feels powerful when it's ours, but when it merges with others, it can take on a life of its own. History is littered with moments when individual fury cascaded into collective rage, protests turning into riots, communities fracturing, online pile-ons destroying reputations overnight, when anger becomes contagion. This is the shadow of mob mentality, the point where rage stops belonging to the individual and becomes a force in itself. At that threshold, the anger doesn't just speak for us, it speaks through us, often in ways we don't fully recognize until it's too late. Attributes of mob rage contagion, emotions spread rapidly through groups. De-individuation, personal responsibility dissolves in the crowd. Escalation, group anger intensifies far beyond individual anger. Simplification, complex issues collapse into slogans, enemies, absolutes. Aftermath, regret, guilt or confusion once the intensity passes. Themes, how fury becomes collective emotional contagion. Psychologist Gustave Le Bon, writing in The Crowd, 1895, argued that individuals in groups lose individuality and take on the mind of the crowd. Modern neuroscience supports this. Mirror neurons and collective arousal spread emotions almost instantly. De-individuation, social psychology experiments by Zimbardo and Diener found that anonymity lowers inhibitions. People hidden in a crowd or behind a screen name are more likely to act aggressively. The spiral of escalation in mobs, anger feeds on itself. Each person's fury legitimizes the others. Online, this happens at warp speed. A few angry voices become thousands in hours. Ritual and catharsis. Sometimes collective anger becomes ritualized chants, marches, symbolic destruction. But without containment, it often spills into violence. Personal reflection. I've never been in the middle of a full-blown riot, but I've felt the smaller versions, the heated atmosphere of group outrage, both in person and online. One memory that stays with me was during the early days of social media pile-ons. I remember scrolling through threads where someone had made a mistake or expressed an unpopular opinion, and the comments filled with scorn and fury. I caught myself joining in once or twice, adding a snide remark, feeling a flicker of belonging in the swarm. But when I stepped back later, I felt uneasy. I realized I wasn't speaking from my own integrity, I was swept into the current. My anger wasn't proportionate to the situation, it was inflated by the group. And though it felt righteous in the moment, later it felt hollow, even shameful. That experience taught me something important. Group anger feels safer than individual anger because it disperses responsibility. But in dispersing it, it also strips away reflection. I wasn't asking myself, is this just? Is this mine? I was only asking, am I part of the group? And that is the danger, that our integrity dissolves into belonging. Psychological insight. The science of the crowd. Le Bon's early theory of the crowd mind suggested that collective anger produces irrationality. Later psychologists refined this idea. Zimbardo's concept of de-individuation showed how anonymity fosters aggression. Diener's Halloween studies with children found that when kids were in groups and unidentifiable, They were far more likely to steal candy. Online spaces amplify this massively. Research by Sula, 2004, described the online disinhibition effect, how people say and do things online they would never say face to face. Add in algorithms that amplify outrage, and you have a perfect storm: de-individuation, contagion, and escalation, all monetized. Neuroscience also reveals that anger is contagious. The amygdala lights up in response to others' anger, even subconsciously. This is why mobs spread fury so quickly. Our bodies mirror rage before our minds even process it. I see myself in this research. Those times I joined the chorus of outrage weren't accidents, they were almost inevitable, given the design. But recognizing that pattern gives me a choice now. I can notice when the pull isn't coming from my integrity, but from the crowd's current. And sometimes the bravest act is stepping back, refusing to add fuel. Embodiment prompt or practice. This week, note you feel anger rising in a group setting, whether in a conversation, online, or even in traffic. Ask, is this truly my anger or am I caught in the current? Notice how your body feels: tighter, more aroused, less reflective. Try pausing before adding your voice. Breathe. Ask, what would I say if I was standing alone, accountable only to myself? Integration moment mob anger is powerful because it offers belonging, the safety of being part of something larger. But that belonging can cost us our integrity. To resist the shadow of mob mentality is not to reject community, but to bring our individuality into it consciously. Rage can unite, but it must be tempered by awareness, otherwise it consumes not only its target but ourselves. Seed to plant this week: when you feel swept into group anger, pause and ask, would I still speak or act this way if I were the only one? If the answer is no, that pause might be the first step in reclaiming your own integrity from the crowd. Inherited anger and generational rage. Not all anger is ours. Sometimes the rage we carry was born long before us, passed down through family wounds, social injustices, or national traumas. Unprocessed fury doesn't disappear. It lingers, shaping identities, stories, and cultures. When rage doesn't die, it moves. This is inherited anger. The rage we inherit without choosing, the burden we carry without fully understanding. Attributes of inherited anger: unspoken legacy, anger transmitted through silence, body language, or atmosphere. Identification: descendants feeling rage without knowing its origins. Collective memory: cultural stories that keep wounds alive. Projection: old anger displaced onto new conflicts. Burden and opportunity: inherited rage can destroy, but also fuel transformation. Themes: how fury crosses generations, family transmission. Psychologists studying intergenerational trauma, Danieli, 1998, show how unprocessed pain from war, abuse, or oppression often resurfaces in children and grandchildren. Even without explicit stories, emotions are absorbed in atmospheres. National and cultural rage. Whole peoples inherit anger from colonization, oppression, or civil conflict. These wounds can fuel cycles of violence, but also movements for justice. Projection into the present. Old grievances are often carried into new contexts. A child might feel overwhelming rage at minor slights, because their nervous system carries echoes of unresolved family fury. Nations, too, can find themselves fighting battles shaped more by history than the present. The ambivalence of inheritance. Inherited anger is not only a curse. When acknowledged, it can fuel resilience, art, and social change. Rage can become a signal as much as a symptom. Personal reflection. When I think of inherited anger, I don't only think of history books or politics. I think of family. I grew up sensing tension that wasn't always named. There were moments when the atmosphere in the house shifted suddenly, when anger seemed to enter the room before anyone said a word. Looking back, I can see that not all of it was about me, or even the moment. Some of it was unresolved from the past. I didn't understand it then, but I carried it in my own body. There were times when my anger flared out of proportion, triggered by things that seemed small. Only later, through reflection, did I realize that some of that heat wasn't mine alone. It was something absorbed, something handed down. It's uncomfortable to admit, but there were also moments where I found myself acting out in ways I had seen before: raising my voice, cutting someone off, expressing irritation that was bigger than the situation. At times I was carrying forward a script that hadn't started with me. What's been liberating, though, is learning that recognition breaks the chain. When I began to name where my anger came from, what was truly mine and what I had inherited, I could begin to separate them. That didn't erase the rage, but it transformed it. Instead of repeating it blindly, I could choose differently. Psychological insight, epigenetics, memory, and rage research in epigenetics shows that trauma alters not only psychology but biology. Studies on descendants of Holocaust survivors, for example, found altered stress responses, a physiological inheritance of trauma. Yehuda et al. 2016. Anger and fear leave traces in the nervous system, transmitted without words. Family systems theory, Bowen, 1978, suggests that unresolved conflict in one generation often resurfaces in the next until it is addressed. Rage in this light isn't just emotional, it's systemic. It belongs to the whole network, not only the individual. Sociologists add another layer. Cultural memory ensures that collective wounds, slavery, colonization, displacement, are kept alive through stories, rituals, and silences. These inheritances shape identity, often unconsciously, fueling both division and solidarity. I see this reflected in my own story. Some of the anger I carried never belonged to me personally. It was absorbed from family tensions, from cultural expectations, from unspoken atmospheres. Once I understood that, I could hold my rage with more compassion. It wasn't only my failing, it was part of a chain. And in recognizing it, I had the chance to do what those before me could not: stop it from spilling unexamined into the future. Embodiment prompt or practice. Take a moment to reflect on the anger you feel most often. Ask, does this belong entirely to me, or could some of it be inherited? Notice whether the intensity feels older than the moment. Write down one example where your anger felt out of proportion. Then ask, whose story might I be carrying? Integration moment, inherited anger, reminds us that rage is not just individual. It's relational, systemic, historical. We carry what was unresolved, often without knowing. But naming this inheritance doesn't doom us to repeat it. It gives us the chance to interrupt the cycle, to hold rage with awareness, and to decide whether we pass it on or transform it. Seed to plant this week: when you feel anger rise suddenly, pause and ask, is this mine or is this older than me? Even if you can't answer, the question itself can shift the weight, turning blind inheritance into conscious choice. The choice at the heart of rage is fire. It can burn, destroy, and consume, but it can also illuminate. What we've seen in this episode is how anger rarely sits still. It is mobilized by politics, amplified by media, unleashed in mobs, and inherited through generations. Much of the rage we feel may not even be entirely ours. It is shaped, scripted, and passed down. The challenge is not to banish anger, but to reclaim it, to see when it is being manipulated, when it is inherited, when it is more about history than the present moment. And in that awareness, to choose differently. Rage can become protest, boundary, courage, but without awareness, it becomes just another machine. So as you move into this week, I invite you to notice the places where rage lives in you. Ask, is this mine or was it given to me? Am I fueling the machine, or am I choosing to transform it? In that pause lies power. In that awareness lies freedom. You've been listening to The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe. Until next time, stay awake, stay present, and keep listening for the truths beneath the noise. James Miller. If you found value in today's episode, you may also be interested in my broader project, The Inversiverse, a series exploring the hidden architecture of perception, identity, control, and consciousness. Across 20 episodes, The Inversiverse dissects indoctrination, language, media manipulation, dark psychology, belief systems, and the evolution of self in the digital age. You can find all episodes of The Inversiverse on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and Substack by searching this place called Earth. These ideas aren't shared to convince you, but to invite you to think, feel, and perceive more consciously in a world designed to keep you distracted. Overview of the Inversiverse, a journey through the mirrors of mind, culture, and control. Episodes 1 to 3 introduce foundational ideas around indoctrination, perception, and manipulation. Episode 4 explores how language, symbols, and cultural norms are used to shape thought. Episode 5 investigates control systems, media narratives, and the illusion of choice. Episodes 6 to 7 dives into collective belief structures and the psychology of mass behavior. Episode 8 focuses on marketing, control theory, game theory, and critical thinking. Episode 9 covers love, relationships, human mating, gender dynamics, and red blue pill ideologies. Episode 10 unpacks dark psychology, the occult, Satanism, and the dark triad personality types. Episode 11 The Simulated Self examines identity, ego, and the rise of post-human consciousness. Episode 12 The Spell of the Mind inquires into language, illusion, and physiology of thought. Episode 13 Conscious Seduction journeys through persuasion, propaganda, and the unseen forces of the mind. Episode 14 The Myth of Sanity sheds light on madness, genius, and the edge of perception. Episode 15 The Algorithmic Mind probes influence, identity, and invisible architects. Episode 16 The Noise of Knowing reveals overload, obsession, and the age of infinite information. Episode 17 Belief Machines delves further into language, desire, and the engine of reality. Episode 18 Submerged Signals examines how the unseen shapes the self. Episode 19 The Alchemy Within traces, food, frequency, and the forgotten intelligence of the body. Episode 20 Encoded Flesh scrutinizes and opens up to the forgotten language of the body, DNA, and biological consciousness.